to the Promoted Podcast. My name's Felicity Furey, and I'm...
How dare you mock us? Good luck, big boy.
Welcome to Promoted. My name's Michael Furey. I'm standing for my beautiful wife, Felicity. We're here on the Promoted Podcast, and Felicity doesn't sound like that, but I thought it'd be a fun way to open. I'm here with the wonderful Renee Wootton. As a short intro to myself, I'm a speaker, a coach, a business owner, and certainly a learner in life. I'd say a student of life and evolving. And today we have the wonderful and beautiful Renee Wootton. Renee, over to you.
Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, wherever you're dialing in from. Renee Wootton, aerospace engineer, pilot, and all things aviation, on a mission to advance aerospace through sustainable aviation fuel adoption. I thought I'd chuck that in there because I've been doing that for about 6 months now, and I'm doing it, fairly routinely. I'm back. I was away for a bit last year. I was dipping in and out of SAF, and now we're fully dead in and really having a great time. So I'm calling in from Larrakia country today. I landed this morning from Sydney, Gadigal country, and it was wet and rainy. So it's good to be back in wet season, and it's humid as anything.
I spent a bit of time in Darwin, and I remember, you're sweating just scrolling on Facebook. It is super hot up there. It is stinking hot. So probably, I'm not sure, maybe sweating kind of relates to this next topic we're going to talk about. And this is the navigating changing relationships as you change through your life and your career. And so, Renee, huge admiration for yourself when it comes to this topic. I think you've been able to navigate this probably better than most. And just a short intro. So I find that this comes up a lot with people, is that as they progress through their careers, as they get comfortable with their priorities as well, like maybe they really are trying to pursue a career, is that the interactions with people they have close to them changes. Whether that might be their mum, their sister, their colleague, or maybe it was actually their ex-colleagues, right? They were known as a ex-person, and now they've started something new, or maybe they've gone into business or something like that. So I'm curious, how do you approach this topic, Renee, with it when you change, but perhaps your relationships haven't?
Yeah. This one's such a juicy one. Well done, you. So I think, I'm actually really excited to get into this conversation because I think that, you have people come into your life for a reason, a season, or a lifetime. And I used to hear this when I was a bit younger, and I was like, what's that about? That sounds a bit odd. I don't really understand. And then fast forward 10, 15 years and I'm like, absolutely. I agree. So for context, at a very young age, everyone, I had to leave home, and it was my choice. And from there, I also made a choice to really never contact my mum again. So that was like a very big choice between 15 to 18 years old. And I have to say that genuinely set me up for life because letting go of your mother, emotionally, physically, I think she'll always be with me emotionally, but like to make the decision to not include her in my life was so epic that when I do have really good friends that become past friends and just a part of a chapter of my life, it's still really hard to process in the moment. I have to say I've had to let go of friends, and it's felt like an absolute breakup of when it felt as painful as like an intimate relationship breakup. But I think that my parents in particular set a very poor example of healthy relationships. So I use that as a bit of an indicator to be like, how does this gauge compared to my parents? Because I didn't want a relationship similar to that. And I shouldn't just say that. There's a lot of context that goes into a comment like that. But I wanted healthy relationships. I wanted stable relationships. I wanted communicative relationships because of the experience I had as a kid. And so I would use their relationship as kind of all right, how is this friendship or this new relationship that I'm in, or how is my work manager? How does like the level of toxicity, lack of communication, or healthiness of that relationship track compared to my parents? I think, appreciating that, you build these beautiful relationships and sometimes they don't work out. And then the amount of, I guess, emotion that comes with that, but also just like the self-talk around, I've lost someone big in my life. Something must be wrong with me as well. Even if you were the one to walk away from that friendship or that relationship. So there's always this level of like self-awareness, self-reflection that I do when I'm in the lead up to exiting a friendship, relationship, or manager. I am very thoughtful in the way that I approach it. I want it to make me happier. I want a friendship, relationship, or manager to build me up, to develop me, to genuinely look out for me. And so if those criteria aren't met, because I had the example of my family and how poorly that went over many years, I cut it early. I don't faff about for a year, 2 years, 3 years in this awful feeling of it's not serving me, it's not making me feel good. I'm hanging on by a thread because I need a relationship as opposed to wanting this one. So there's a lot in that for me. Feel free to cherry pick what you want to know more about, Michael, but I think I'm very methodical in who I allow in my life.
Yeah, I think that I was going to use the word intentional, but methodical is a great word. I think what's quite unique about you, which I see a lot of people don't do, is that intentionality, methodicalness about relationships. And often, like I deal with a lot of people who are kind of navigating one job to a new job, and perhaps they've ended up in a situation in one role where they've ended up with let's say dynamic would be a good way to put it, which doesn't serve them.
Yeah.
And especially if you're going from one job and you're getting promoted into the new job, is that I often hear from people, well, how do I know that I'm not going to get this kind of repeat situation that I've got in my current job, in my new role? And the uncomfortable answer I often find is, well, you have to make sure you change, that you don't repeat behaviors that you were doing previously that allows that dynamic to show up.
Yes, absolutely.
You can get promoted, but you yourself don't actually go through the evolution and change which is required for that new situation. And I think that's where, so I'm curious, when you're saying you're thinking about leading up to that breakup where you're quite clear that something perhaps needs to change, or that evolution.
Yeah.
What are you asking yourself about that? Yeah, what are you thinking about? How to talk us through that?
I actually love this. So I think a big part of
why do you love this?
I love it because it's actually a bit weird, isn't it? I love it because it challenges me to really think about myself and also my expectations of others. So I get excited because I'm like, it's okay that people don't change around you, and it's okay for people to be exactly who they are. And I think the moment that you stop expecting something from other people is the moment you almost have this appreciation for the fact that it's okay that you are different too. And I think, when you're making these decisions, there has to be a lot of self-appreciation, a lot of backing yourself, a lot of accepting you are who you are and that you are different to the people around you that you're looking to leave a relationship from. And sometimes that can be hard. But I think if you can see that a relationship isn't serving you, so in the past couple of years, right, I'm going to use the years 2020 to 2022. They were pretty transformational years for me. I lost in that period my 2 best friends and my relationship. Wow. And I say I lose, but I exited all 3 of those relationships. That was torture. I had one friend I had been like almost in a platonic relationship with. We were best friends. We did everything together. We studied together. It was amazing. And then things changed and I wasn't being treated with respect. So that was one. The next one was one of my best friends again kept relying on me too heavily to make decisions for their life, kept coming to me with, what do I message this person? How do I email this? What should I do about my job? Every day. I'm not talking once a week. I'm talking every day. And I was also going through the process of deciding whether or not I was in the right relationship. So I had a lot of emotional stress on me at the same time as stepping up into my first executive role, right? It was a it was a bad time. Use the language. Please cut that out. So I actually noticed in myself my emotional tolerance was reducing quite significantly. So the friend that needed a lot of support every day, I was like, I feel dead inside. I cannot help. I was like, I'm at my wit's end. Like, you have to do this. And then my relationship, I was experiencing things in my body like anxiety manifesting into physical reactions. And I just hadn't, felt the level of nausea, literal shaking from anxiety at the time. So all three of these relationships, I think between 2020 and 2022, all blew up in my face. And I got to the end of 22 and I was like, oh, that was a lot to go through. And I spent a lot of time reflecting, like, have I done the right thing? Have I respected myself in each of these in walking away? And why have I walked away? And I got really clear on all of those things because you constantly go through the cycle of the emotion attached to losing someone, right? Some days it'll be great. And then the next day you feel terrible and you miss them and you want to reach out to them. And then, you wake up the next day again, and you're like, all right, I've got this today. And then the next day it's like so close to sending a text message to be like, I'm so sorry about everything. So that was a really important period in my life because I stood by myself. I respected myself first above everything. And I walked away from 3 very powerful relationships. And I do not regret a thing. I still feel the pain of those 3 relationships in different ways, but I accept that that's just part of the process. It's like the pain I felt walking away from my mum when I was 15. That pain is still with me today. It still comes up in different ways. I try and process that. It doesn't take over it doesn't consume a lot of my energy, but there is, there's some sort of emotional, leftovers that carry themselves in my body because of that.
Of course. Yeah.
What about you, Michael? What's your process in the lead up to walking?
I don't think I've ever thought through my process that well.
Fair enough. What have you learned?
I think a couple of things. The way I've approached it has probably been probably more ruthless and lacking emotional maturity, I would say.
Interesting.
And I would say the way I've dealt with it is by avoidance and separation rather than kind of being emotionally stepping through it. So I would say I'm thinking about a couple of friends I had back in Sydney, and I was relatively close with these 2 guys. And my mentor at the time, I would share with him about some of the conversations I'd be having with these 2. And he challenged me by saying, Michael, you need to be careful about who you let walk through your brain because they leave muddy footprints. And I've always loved that expression because whenever you're talking with anyone, if you think about they're leaving footprints on your brain, because it makes you think about that as like a very tangible and very visible thing that whoever you spend time with, including spending time with us here on the Promoted Podcast, we're leaving footprints on your brain. And to the point that they may serve you, and we hope they do, they also may not. And there comes a time where you have to just make a decision, I'd say, about whether they do or not. And in this situation, I decided that the footprints they were leaving were ones of self-doubt, and they were placing a disparaging character or make disparaging comments and remarks over the mentor that I was working with.
Yeah.
And that's where the mentor, instead of saying they're wrong, just basically challenged me to think about, you decide. And I decided that, yeah, they were wrong. And I'm so glad I did, because that they were just highlighting from their own cynicism that actually perhaps what was happening was not as good as I thought. But actually, you're the only one who knows, and you've got to make a judgment on that, I'd say.
Yeah. And it's hard to make that judgment without experience, right? That's the challenging thing.
Correct. Well, you just have to make a decision, and then you hope it works out, and you learn either way. For me, though, I would just basically do cold turkey, just cut, and I just
and the reason I struggle with that is because then it doesn't give that person an opportunity to learn or get closure. So I'm kind of thinking about, hey, if I'm friend enough to you, I'm going to tell you why I'm at where I'm at. And that way they have a reason, and they either take it as a learning opportunity or they ignore it. That's up to them. But I almost feel like I would rather go, hey, you've upset me. Here's why. Here's why I think I need some space, and then leave it there.
That's very impressive. I'm not sure I've got that.
I'm impressed that you haven't done that for people.
Yeah, I don't necessarily think. I guess, yeah. No, I don't necessarily think that's my role necessarily, to draw.
Yeah, that's true. You don't have to
draw that, to be the teacher, as it were. Yeah, I don't think so. And I think for me, I would find that very difficult to do, actually. So yeah, cold turkey is probably my preferred approach, and just the quiet phase out. Just don't.
Would you ghost me if I annoyed you?
No. Not if you annoyed me. Now, if you annoyed me, I'd let you know. But if I was phasing you out, I wouldn't exactly be proactive to let you know. If that makes sense.
Interesting. Good for you. Yeah.
And so, because I think, and we touched on in a previous episode about, when you go to visit people, or when you go to a city and you say, hey, do you want to catch up? And I found that probably in recent times really eye-opening. And I had it with a situation with my family member, actually, where they were in town, and I was like, oh, cool, let's catch up. And like they turned up, but they were like there for 15 minutes, and like they really actually didn't want to hang out. And I was like, oh wow, they're not actually that into hanging out. And I was like, oh, that's fine, that's cool. But I was like, oh, I hadn't seen that. And I think I'm very guilty of overlaying my values and priorities onto other people.
Yes.
And if I'm willing to travel to go and see someone, I'm like, well, they must be the same. And it's been interesting when you actually do say, hey, do you want to hang out? Cool, I need you to come to this part of Sydney. Then they're just like, oh, I can't, blah, 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 blah. I'm like, all those reasons you've given, I consider to be fairly trivial, and I would find a way to figure it out.
Yeah.
And if you don't, then that would mean that you don't want to as much as I would. And I was like, that's very helpful, actually, with dealing with reality.
Yeah.
Rather than a perceived reality. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, it does.
So I find it tricky, and I love you. I love that you are so vulnerable about it still hurts. And I think that's actually really important to acknowledge, is that it does hurt. I think and even when you evolve, when you progress, when you quote unquote phase people out, change, drop them, whatever. Yeah. You often have moments of like self-doubt.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right?
And also just coming back to sharing why you're exiting as opposed to ghosting. I'm not a huge fan of like the slow fade. And I think this applies in many different ways, right? If you think about the workplace, you can't slow fade your shit boss or your bad direct report, right? You've got to be upfront. You've got to tell them exactly what's going on and how you expect their behavior to change. So why is that? Why is that only?
I would disagree. Just so you know.
You would?
Absolutely.
Okay, tell me more. Why?
Absolutely. Like, I think you got to pick your battles. I don't think like
I agree.
A slow fade in the workplace actually can make a lot of sense.
But not for a manager or a direct report, right? Somebody that's a part of your team.
No, I think there would be times and a place where it can also make sense.
Okay, fair enough. Well, I mean, it's still to work with these people, right? So even if you turn up and don't have the small chat about how your weekend was, maybe you'd redact that sort of conversation. But
Yeah.
what would you do the slow fade in the workplace? I'm
Well,
curious.
slow fade would be there would be times. So so initially, let's say I'd be working with people and I'd be investing a lot into them,
Yeah.
and then I'm starting to notice actually I'm probably it feels like there's an imbalance here. I'm giving more than I'm getting, and so instead of saying, "Hey, I'm gonna like announce the new strategy," I would just start to implement the new strategy. Cool. I don't think I'm getting as much as I'm giving here. Cool. No worries. I'll just redirect and change my priorities and that. So I wouldn't necessarily, hold up the banner like things are going to change now. I'd be like, cool, I got it. Because I'm my mentor, Frank, who I've talked to a bit about on this podcast now,
Yeah.
he was just like, actions tell you everything. And the actions are far more important than words because
Okay.
we can all say we're a great person and we all, oh, I love our friendship, it's so powerful. And then if someone won't drive 20 minutes to catch up, then you get everything. You get the real picture.
Yeah.
And that's why I think actions are incredible from that regard. And as a leader, especially as you progress, it's all about what people do rather than what they say, actually.
Yeah.
And so that's how I would think about it. So I don't think you need to do a big announcement, to show like how I'm changing. I would just tweak. Personally, I would just go, all right, I'm going to change this. I'm going to new strategy. Stop prioritizing that. Let's move forward. Not to say I'm going to just completely fade them out. I wouldn't say that as a manager is a good strategy at all.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't necessarily like if they weren't responding to my mentorship, say, I wouldn't continue to just keep going or even feel like it was my part so that I have to tell them about a change in that approach. Is that communicate?
Yeah, I mean that flies. I'm just thinking about the context of somebody that's in your team that isn't, turning up, isn't demonstrating through action. Yeah, you change the strategy, which is correct. But then how do you communicate that to the person that you need them to step up, or it's performance management plan and then potentially you've lost your job? Like that's the nuance that I'm looking for in this conversation, I guess.
I'd say you're probably looking at something more mission critical than I'm talking about. So if it was like I'm talking more about like they're at least doing the base level of performance.
Yeah, got it. Yeah.
If they're not doing base level performance, but if they're, I'd be thinking about this kind of next level. If they're not doing the basics, if we're talking about performance management, very different conversation. I would say.
Yeah. So I would say before I even get to like performance management, I would sit down, whether they're doing the baseline or not, and generally people aren't doing the baseline if you're having this conversation. I say, hey, this is the status, like this is where you're at. This is where I expect you to be at. Can you talk to me about why you're not there? And then how do we build a development plan together to get you there? And then you have that conversation maybe once or twice. And then from there, it's performance management. But I do the same thing in my personal friendships, my relationships at home, as well as my colleagues. I have a very honest conversation early and I'm like, this is where we're at.
I buy that.
How do we get there?
In the interest of time, I think so I think there's two distinct strategies we're talking about here. I've got one, you've got one. Yours is up front. And I think it feels like you shoulder a lot of responsibility in that relationship changing. I would look at it is that you don't have to do it that way.
Yeah.
And I actually don't think what's that, sorry?
I've learned something new today.
Yeah, I don't think you necessarily. I think I'm of the view, and people, it's hard to change people without them wanting to change.
Agree.
And so certainly don't give up immediately, but also I would say look at clues about whether that person's going to serve you moving forward. And I actually really loved what you said. It was around, am I serving have I served myself is what you said. Have I upheld what's important to me? And I think that's a really powerful place to come from, is that, and an invitation to people listening is, are you upholding what's important to you in the relationships you have? And if you weren't, that's okay. You don't necessarily have to change that. But moving forward, if you are to change and have different outcomes, then that is something to really focus in and honor moving forward. Because otherwise you can end up living someone else's life ultimately. And I think that's where you have a steadfastness and a courage and I'm going to do this. I'm kind of excited perhaps when we have one of those conversations for you and me down the track. I'm like, I wonder what it's like to be on the receiving end of a Renee in a, what do you call it? Like I don't know. The word escapes me. Not an instigation or like a, I don't know. Like
a fire emoji. Something's gone wrong.
Intervention is the word I'm looking for. An intervention, a Renee intervention. So
yes, exactly. That's it. And I do just want to recap too. I think, the point of having conversations about people's progress and how they're performing to me is really important, because I would rather know how someone feels about me and have the opportunity to make a change at least once, at least have a transparent conversation so that I can then make a choice as to how serious I want to take the feedback. And I think that that's something I'm very passionate about, is sometimes people are just so busy in their own minds and have too much happening outside of them to know how to turn up in the right way at work. So I think being there and affording people the opportunity to have a conversation to either make that choice to grow or not is something that's very important to me, because I would always hope that someone would come to me with their feedback so that I have that same option. Rather than the slow fade. So you've heard it. You've got two different strategies, people. The slow fade, action says more than words, or words are important is my kind of takeaway. It's always nice to have a conversation, be transparent, and then go from there. We hope today's conversation has been helpful. We've tackled quite a bit in today's session, but as always, Michael, it's such a pleasure to chat to you.
Super great, Renee. And I'd love to hear from people listening. Like, what's your strategy? Have we got the right strategies? What's your strategy in terms of navigating this? What would you do differently? And and vote for my strategy. No, I'm joking.
Compassion always wins.
All right. Thanks everybody. We'll see you next time.
See you.